All right, this is Greg Smith. Welcome to today's webinar on Introduction to DISC. I've been using DISC assessments for over 15 years and just find them a valuable asset to everything we do when it comes to training, understanding people, hiring the right people, building effective teams, resolving conflict. So here's what we're going to cover today in our webinar. We just have a couple of objectives. We're going to be on the call today, maybe 45 to 60 minutes, and we're going to talk about what is DISC. What does those four letters stand for? What are the four primary behavioral styles? We call the 4Cs and the 4Ps. We're going to talk about a few famous personalities that display these four behavior styles. We'll talk about a few politicians. I'm not being political, but strictly looking at their behavior. And we're going to talk about some of the strengths and limitations of each of the four styles. And then at the end of the program, talk about how to obtain your own DISC report and a little bit about our DISC certification programs that are available for those who want to go into more detail and truly understand DISC and use it in their own organizations. So I want to talk about my favorite author, my favorite book, Jim Collins, From Good to Great. And he says, people are not your most important asset. The right people are. And they says, get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. And what we understand through this is that Jim Collins is talking about, high-level leadership. But how do you know what the right person looks like? You truly can't trust job interviews anymore. And we are as diverse as we are as from the left to the right, behaviorally diverse. And what we all understand, all of us who've been in the business world a long time, is that how we get along with people, our personality, and our behavior affects everything we do. I remember I was doing a workshop for all the district attorneys in just the state of Georgia, and all the DAs took their assessments, and one of the DAs from one of the counties in Georgia came up to me after the workshop, and he says, Greg, you explained to me and showed me what my retention problem is. And then he said it was me. And we looked at his report. He had a super high D profile. He's very task-oriented, direct, and he was having trouble retaining attorneys because in his office, they have to work rapidly and solve cases and resolve things. And he's finding he's been hiring the wrong people who are taking far too long to resolve the cases. Plus his high D style sort of rubbed people the wrong way. So here's what organizations use assessments for. Now, before I sort of go into this, there are two primary behavior assessments out there on the market today. There's Myers-Briggs and there's DISC. And what I'm finding out is more and more people are coming over from Myers-Briggs to DISC, I think primarily because it's so easy to use. Also, Myers-Briggs only measures 16 behavior styles, and our DISC assessments measure over 354 behavior styles. So DISC is much more robust, much more analytical. At the same time, it's very easy to use. Primarily, we find out that most people use DISC assessments for building effective teams, helping people get along, understanding each other. How do the Ds communicate to the Cs? A lot of organizations use DISC as part of their hiring process. And when we have a hiring process, we break it into the 30-30-30 rule. 30% interview, 30% background checks, references, and 30% the results of the assessment. So the assessment should never be used solely as part of the selection process, but a part of a thorough selection process. And then it's used to place people, as Jim Collins, placing the right people in the right seats, ensure you got the people who have the high energy, leading the pack, and you have the people who are more analytical, making sure we do the right things and verifying what we do. It can also use for development and coaching, help people pick the right careers, help people identify why there's conflict in their life, why they get along with some people and why they don't get along with other people. And then when we have, conflict between a couple of individuals, the assessments can be used to identify what might be causing that conflict and coming up with a action plan to resolve the conflict. So let me just go back in history here and talk about the individual who is sort of credited for being the grandfather of DISC, and his name is Dr. William Marston. And he, back in the 1930s, did his original research on behavior, the 4 styles of behavior. He was a lawyer and a psychologist from Harvard University, and he wrote the original book, Emotions of Normal People. And our company has taken a lot of that research from the 30s, as well as other people who have done research in behavior, and computerized it and created one of the most accurate accurate assessments that are available on the market. And when you take our assessments, you'll have the results within a few seconds after you answer the last questions. One of the interesting things about Dr. Marston, he also helped invent the lie detector test. And later in his life, he created Wonder Woman and the Wonder Woman comic books. I guess he realized there's more money in doing comic books than being a psychologist or a lawyer. So he was the original person who came up with the 4 behavior styles that we're talking about today. Now, we've always heard about the word emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is, all it is aspects of how we relate and understand other people. The DISC strictly looks at the behavior within a person's emotional intelligence, how we get along with people, how direct or indirect we are, how quick or how slow. So the DISC or behavior assessments show an aspect of emotional intelligence. DISC is not a personality test. There is no assessment out there that can measure something as complicated as our behavior or as our personality, which is developed over the years and multifaceted. So let's just talk about DISC, and then we're going to talk about some of the 4 Ps and the 4 Cs. There are 4 temperaments or 4 behavior styles within DISC. Now, D is the red wheel here. D stands for dominance. It sometimes stands for directness. And it's red because the emotion of high Ds is anger. I have an Irish background. I'm fair skinned, and when I get angry, you can read me like a book because I do turn red. I, yellow, is enthusiasm. I for influence as it relates to how we relate to people. And it's yellow is sort of like, sunshine, enthusiastic, people like Oprah Winfrey, high individuals, everybody's a friend. They have, make friends easily. And then we have, the S for steadiness. And that's to your pace, how rapid or how slow you respond, to issues. And it's green, sort of like growth, like a tree, like the roots that go into the ground. It's slow but steady. S people are very loyal and dedicated, and high S's are very meticulous in what they do. And then C, compliance to rules, and the color blue. Blue is sort of, analytical. It's deep like the ocean. We find high C people are very thorough. They're very intelligent. They're detailed oriented. They like to validate things. And they may not be as assertive and outgoing as the D and I people, who are more people oriented, and the D's are very much task oriented, but the I people are, your friendly, outgoing, gregarious style people. So those are the 4 behavior styles, or what we call temperaments. Now, all of us, when we take an assessment, have various degrees of these 4 temperaments. Some of us are high, some of us are low, some of us are direct, some of us are indirect. So when we look at the Ds, there's high Ds, their strength is addressing problems. They're very aggressive and assertive. and they also how they respond to challenges. They're sort of very independent people. The I people is how we influence people and contacts. The S people is how we deal with pace and consistency. The high S people are much more consistent. The low S people are very spontaneous and sometimes shoot from their hip. Compliance is how we deal with procedures and constraints. High C people follow procedures to the T. Low C people believe in proceeding till apprehended. They're more innovative and not as regulated as other individuals. So what is behavioral style? Behavioral style is really just two things: how we express our internal emotions through our external behavior. And we sometimes hit a comfort zone in our life where, 80, I would say 70% of our behavior is based on our DNA. And the remainder, the 30%, sort of based on our experiences growing up. These two ladies are from Zappos. I don't know if you've ever been to Zappos, but they're the most enthusiastic people I've ever met. Everywhere, every person you meet is friendly and outgoing. They sort of have this high I temperament. And so again, DISC measures behavioral style. Behavioral style is how we express ourselves through our emotions, through our external behavior. And that is read by people by your body language. Whether you frown or smile, or whether you're animated and use gestures, whether you're quick or slow, or you're analytical or shoot from the hip. That is what behavior is, and that's what DISC measures. Now, let's look at, now we're sort of going to look at one of the reports, and we have like 9 varieties of DISC reports. Now, whenever you do a job interview, or say go out on a date or a blind date, what you see in that process is just the tip of the iceberg. That's what you see in a job interview, and you're not really interviewing the individual, you're interviewing the representative, because they put their best foot forward. And what you find out through the use of our assessments is what's beneath the iceberg. And that's what's really important, because if you make a bad hiring decision, then you're going to have someone who's going to cause you a lot of grief and a lot of expense and a lot of turnover because you hired the wrong person. You can't fool these assessments. And basically the DISC assessments give you sort of a set of 3 graphs and a lot of verbiage in the reports. You have the standard DISC graph like this with the 4 colors. And you have a wheel at the back of the report that is used for mapping group behavior and team behavior. And it gives you a more holistic view of an individual than just, the 4 colors, because like I said, there's 384 different varieties of behavior, and that's what these graphs will show you about the person. So here's some key points I want to cover. And then I'm going to talk about some famous personalities. With our DISC reports is, number one, the high and low scores are both important. We measure the absence and presence of behavior. For example, this person's a low I, their yellow line is like 11%. That just means they're more pessimistic and moody. And then they're a high C, which means they're very analytical, detailed oriented, and sort of slow in getting things done, but very a thorough researcher. So the high scores and the low scores are very significant. Most other DISC assessments only measure the high scores, which sort of leaves out 50% of understanding a person's behavior. A DISC report is not a good or bad thing. You can't pass it, you can't fail it, you can't retake it and get a higher score. You can't fool it or trick it. And it's very simple to take, takes about 15 minutes. And what's really important is that every team, every organization needs a variety and diversity of the 4 styles. Anytime you have a company that is lopsided, say they all have too many of this or too many of that, you may not be as effective as you should be. But then on the other hand, what we find out is that human behavior is very predictable. There are some behavioral styles that are better suited for certain jobs than others, and we'll go into that here in a little bit. The other thing about our reports is they're universal. They've been validated in over 25 different countries, and you can take the report in 35 different languages. So that's the key points about those reports. Now let's talk about some famous personalities. See if you recognize these people. Now when we talk about the D's, we have Judge Judy, very direct, to the point. We could also put Donald Trump up there most likely. The focus is, problems, straight shooters, independent people. They're very good with teams as long as they're in charge of the team. And then high I's, which are the people, related people like Michael Scott. Now I'm exaggerating a little bit. Most people aren't like these photographs here, but I just want you to get a drift of the style that these people represent. High I people like to be liked. They're very outgoing. They're super friendly. They are good in reducing conflict. And then we have, my mind just went blank. You probably, the movie Captain Phillips, Tom Hanks, high S individual, steady, takes care of the team, is methodical, easy to get along with, non-emotional, like Tom Hanks in the movie he played as, Captain Phillips. In many of the movies he's played similar behavior. And their pace, so high S people, slow and steady, low S people, spontaneous and sometimes disorganized. And then high C people. I think this is Damon from the Shark Tank. If you watch Shark Tank, I love that show just because it shows those diverse personalities. He's a high C, very analytical. He very rarely has any expression, but you can just see his mind just sort of chopping people's ideas silently and analytically. And he's just no fluff, and he's just a straight shooter, very task-oriented. And, their focus is procedures. So the D's focus on problems, the I's on people, the S's on pace, the C's on procedures. We have to have all four types in the right jobs in order for our organizations to be effective. So let's look at these four, I would say, emotions that each of these people have. The high D's are quick to anger, shoot from the hip, sometimes hurting people's feelings, and then, not even noticing that until down the road. Low D's, slow to anger. High I's, optimism. Oh, let's have a good time, and, everything is wonderful, and let's go be motivated. And then the low I, and we need people like that. God, you think, imagine what the workforce would be like if everybody was pessimistic and moody and grumbling all the time. Oh no, I wouldn't want to work there. Low I's, that's what they tend to be, more pessimistic. High S's are non-emotional. They don't show their feelings, they're hard to read. And we find in relationships, opposites tend to attract. My daughters assess their fiancés before they married them. I've had a lot of people tell me they wish they did that with their spouse before they married them. Now it's too late. And low S's, much more emotional and energized. And if you have a high D who's also a low S, you have a proverbial bull in the china shop who is going to knock everything down. High C is fear. They're not afraid, but they're much more conscientious. They want to be accurate. They're not going to risk to do something that's going to be perceived as wrong or sloppy or inaccurate. Versus the low C's, they're that way. They forgive, and they will take action and ask for forgiveness later. Low Cs have more accidents than high Cs because they're a little bit more careless with details. And so those are the emotions. So we talk about the Ds like to solve problems. The I's is about people. The S's is about the pace. And the C's is about compliance to procedures and rules and regulations. So let me just put up some famous faces here. These are, when I'm exaggerating, these are your extreme high Ds who don't have any other line above the 50% line. And, Colonel Nathan Jessup, from the movie Few Good Men, he says, "You can't handle the truth." And, Tom Cruise just pushes them to a limit, which sometimes happens to high Ds. Here's some of the characteristics of the high Ds. Is a lot of high Ds are self-motivated. The report sometimes says egotistical. Not that they're egotistical about, look how important I am kind of egotistical, but they're self-motivated. They're about personal achievement. And they're usually very competitive. You challenge them, they're going to jump back at you. They're going to challenge you back. They're expressive and, like the executive notes of everything. Don't like a lot of details. A long conversation with a high D is like 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can see their eyes roll back of their head. And interesting, if you're in a sales organization, in which we have a lot of companies who are, and they train their salespeople on DISC so they know how to recognize and sell to their customers. Because if you're selling to a high D, you got to be succinct to the point. What's the bottom line? How much is this going to cost? If you're selling to a high I, you got to be much more friendly and break the ice and sociable and talk a little bit more. And then, try to keep the eye on target and get them to buy the way they like to buy. If you're dealing with C's, selling to C's, you're going to have to provide references, details, accuracies. I'm going to read the consumer reports to see if this product is, accurate and does what it's supposed to say. It's recommended. Sales cycles very quick with the D's and I's, is very long with the S's and C's. So the D's again are, straight shooters. They're challenging, they're competitive, and they just want the facts. Now let's talk about the I's, which are totally opposite than the D's. Here's some famous personalities who are very high I's. Bill Clinton, outgoing, gregarious. Eddie Murphy, high I. And so let's look at some of those characteristics. The I's talk about influencers, inspiring, sociable. And, they like to talk. Sometimes they can talk too much. Sometimes lose track of time. But they're great at making people feel good. Everybody likes high I's because they're likable people. And if you're a likable person, then, people are going to like you more. You're more popular, and they're going to listen and like to be around you. And that's a good thing, or it could be a bad thing sometimes if, they're leading you in the wrong direction. But they're good at motivating other people. But they have one lacking thing, that a shortcoming is they like to be liked, and sometimes they're not the best disciplinarian and don't hold people accountable, who take advantage of the situation, and sometimes you're easy to fool. So anyway, those are the I's, and then we have the S's. We all, if you grew up like I did with Andy Griffith, Mayberry, Barbara Bush, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Morgan Freeman, they're sort of steady, reliable, and their thing is about serving other people. They want to work for a leader who they can trust. They aren't good with change. They like things in writing. They don't like conflict. While the D's like to start conflict. The S's don't. And the S's are kind of people who will, when you ask them a question, they'll say yes, even though they mean even though they mean no. So you're not quite sure unless you really the S trust you if you're getting the right information. But they're the ones who hold everything together. They're team-oriented. People look up to them. They're the go-to people. They will come in early, work late. 40% of the population is a high S individual. And this is the picture here is Cameron. He's we used to go on 8-day sailing adventures from Miami to the Bahamas, and we were trained the boys how to sail the sailboat. And Cameron, became an Eagle Scout. I had the honor to present him an Eagle Scout award. But he was looked up by everybody because being a high S, he was never emotional. He never got mad. He never yelled, never screamed. People just sort of looked up to him, almost a natural leader. And let's talk about the C's. Is the C's are maybe 28% of the population. C's, compliant, cautious, accurate, and they follow rules. The high C's do. That is, Al Gore, brilliant man. He invented the internet, so he's a genius. Mark Zuckerberg, Albert Einstein, and Mr. Carson from the series Downton Abbey, who is the head butler of this fictional English manor where they had servants below and aristocracy above, and he was sort of like the sergeant major. He maintained the rules and the discipline. There's no fraternization between the classes, like a high C who's very comfortable in a process-oriented world. That doesn't exist anymore, does it? So here's some of the characteristics of the C's. They're good. They validate things. They are accurate. They're detailed oriented. They're smart. They don't like conflict. They like to follow the book. They're uncomfortable or fearful if things change and if things aren't going the way they're supposed to be going. And many times the C's are looked down upon by the rest of the business world because, they have the right answers and they're not very direct. So we have to make sure we really know how to communicate with the C's in order for them to be a valuable part of the team. Otherwise, our ship, our boat will be off course and we'll be in big trouble. So let's look at some of the graphs and analyze a few reports. And then again, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type them in, and we'll keep going here till we finish up. All right, this is I said the standards report, and like I said, a lot of organizations will use the report for hiring or reducing conflict. And this graph is a floor nurse in a hospital, and it is really a benchmark, a model of what the ideal floor nurse would look like. Now the D, which is again their task orientedness, they're solving problems. The higher the D, maybe they'd make a better, would be a supervisor nurse. But in this case, this isn't a supervisor. It's strictly a patient care nurse. It has 3 colors above the energy line. Anytime we see 3 colors, it shows more adaptability and flexibility. If the scores are under 80 and above 20, it just shows they have less temperamental, flares of behavior. This person is just easygoing. They're friendly. The I means they're friendly, people-oriented. And boy, we need that in healthcare, don't we? Then the S is the pace. It shows someone who is capable of building good relationships, long-lasting relationships, and is organized And then their C score means they are more analytical. They can do charting. They can make sure the healthcare organization gets paid. They're not super high C's like a CPA, but they're just the right levels for a nurse. So if a client was looking for a profile for a floor nurse, this is what we would look for. And then this is the same thing, but it's more 3D. We like to see people score right around in the third ring, which means they have 3 colors above the energy line. And, obviously if the people who go through our certification training, get a lot more training on how to use these graphs in order to accomplish their goals. Now, I deal with a lot of sales organizations. And here we see a salesperson, again, 3 colors above the midline. Someone who's a little bit a higher D, which means they have more initiative. They're more willing to, make those phone calls, make those visits, but they're not like way over here off the chart like some politicians we know about, just sort of 70% comfortable directed style. They're very people-oriented, 86%. Means they're going to, be good talkers, likable. And then what I really like with the salespeople is this green line, which again shows they're more organized, they can take notes, they will build long relationships. And, versus someone who has a low green line, which would be more like a used car salesman, just in for the one sale, make the sale, move on to the next victim. This person is more relationship oriented. And the C, again, is compliance to rules. We don't want salespeople to be way up high C, which means they're going to be more restrictive. And we want salespeople to be a little bit more flexible with the rules in order to please their customers, as long as they don't break the rules. So that's normal for salespeople to be a low C unless they are a technical salesperson. Then that C should be higher. Now this is an accountant, very analytical, following procedures and rules. Doesn't want to violate. If you have an accountant, you want them to be that way, right? You don't want to have an accountant to take some, shortcuts and on your taxes or something, and both of you end up in jail. So we want that C. Again, we have an S as someone's process oriented, and this is actually an accountant with a personality. They have a 52% I score, so they're still going to be friendly. But detailed oriented and, quite passive. They're not going to be your change agent, rocking the boat. And we don't want that in an accountant. So, and then just to show you, the graph on the right is the way the person is at home. This is their natural style. This is the most accurate. The graph on the left is the way they adapt to the work environment. And we always look if there's disparity between the two graphs to see if there's any stress at the job that we need to resolve before we have our accountant, turn in their notice because they're not happy in their job. So we look at these two graphs. This is home, this is work. All right, and then, when we use the wheel, which is on the last page of the report, it just shows again the high D's over here. But most people have some D's, and they may have some I, and they may have some green, some S. So this is a good graph that we use to plot, say, a department, which I'll show you in the moment. So when you realize us as individuals, as I said earlier, that sometimes we have blind spots, that we get into comfort zones, and we don't necessarily see that, but other people around us do. And another good reason to have the DISC report is to identify what may be your shortcomings as well as your strengths and the value you bring to the organization. It's just not only is it an organizational tool, but it's an individual tool to help us improve our potential and eliminate some of those blind spots that could keep us from achieving that next promotion or that next level we're trying to achieve. And those people who take the reports I talked about, like the DAs, sometimes have this blindness in their behavior that gets them in trouble a lot. And through coaching or personal development, you can improve your behavior to achieve the goals that you want to set out to achieve. Here's an example of someone like that. This was a CEO who called me up. He said, Greg, I've made all the money I ever need to make in my life. And he said, I've decided I want to start off in a new career. And I want you to help me find what my new career is. And that's a big problem to have, right? When you've made all the money in your life and you don't need any more, I'd love to have that problem. But anyway, he took a series of assessments, not just DISC, but some advanced reports. And this is the paragraph that came off the first page of his report. Just read the highlighted words. How would you like to work with him? His standards will be met. John has high ego strengths, viewed as some as egotistical, work compulsive. I mean, that's probably why he's been so financially successful throughout his life. But he said, well, what am I going to do next? And he started throwing out different possible careers. And when I read his reports, I knew what he was not going to be good at, particularly when you look at this D over C issue, which means he wants it done his way and he wants it done at a certain level of perfectionism. So do it now and do it my way. And his people side way down here, I could tell he wasn't going to be good working in a nonprofit somewhere when you're working with volunteers, because you have to have a really high eye to work with volunteers. So that was out. And so after a lot of discussion, we find out that probably he would be more suited as a consultant or a mentor to other people in the business world, and avoid any. And I asked him, I said, what aspect of your life do you hate? And he said, I hate going to all those networking meetings where you got to meet people. He says, it just wears me out. So that sort of explained a lot what he probably didn't or could not do in the future. So he ended up, I think, becoming a volunteer, mentor, teacher for other people in the business world, because he was, he could never leave that business side of his life. Another graphs that you get in this report, and this is sort of what we use as a quick thumbnail for hiring, you have 12 competencies that the DISC report measures, and they're rank ordered based on how you score on the report. So you see with this person, their top 4 strengths is competitiveness, urgency, frequent change, versatility. It must be a person who has high D scores. And his or her weaknesses or limitations is follow up and follow through, consistency, following policy, and being organized. So if you're trying to say, for example, you need to hire a HR manager, these probably aren't the competencies you want this applicant or this person or this incumbent to possess to be a good HR manager. They probably would be a problem as an HR manager, to put it lightly. Now, a couple other pages in the report, if you have trouble with understanding what motivates people, and everybody's motivated differently, you got to have a different reward recognition plan for your organization because everybody is different. This gives you what motivates the individual. And then this shows you keys to managing that person. It also gives you a page that shows how to communicate to that person. What's the best way to communicate to them? Like the D's, they want it, all the facts, bottom line, quick and dirty. The I's, they're going to want, social and feeling with people and communication, more involved with the people side and communicating. So everybody's different. And many times when we do a workshop, we'll find a department or company, they're having morale, motivation, communication problems, and they've already sort of picked who the people in their department they don't talk to or don't like, and then they go around them, which affects productivity in that department. So they all go through a workshop, and now they realize the person they don't like isn't because they're a bad, evil, mean person. They're just diverse in their behavior style. And when they start seeing that, then they say, well, no wonder I don't get along. Or now I know why I get along with so-and-so. And when they finish the workshop, everybody's sort of feeling good. They're starting on a flat level, and they can start working together effectively, and everybody's happy again. The report also can give you your list of improvement areas, and this will turn into a development plan in order to eliminate these things that you decide, or if you're a manager, you decide for your people you're coaching what they need to work on. And people can't get mad at these reports because they answered the question. It's not like a 360 where you want to blame people for giving you bad scores. They can't be mad at anybody else if they have scores they don't particularly care for. And so let me just finish a little bit, talk about how you can use this wheel and our online system. You can use your online system to plot people on the wheel. You can lay it out as top performers versus low performers. We use this as a hiring intervention. This was a bank. They were having high turnover. We had everybody, all the incumbents, take the assessment, and we found everybody that was in this little red ring were the best bank tellers because they had the lowest turnover. They liked repetitious work. They were supporters, coordinators. They were friendly to customers. Customers liked them, and weren't temperamental. Showed up on time. Versus the people outside the ring didn't mean they were bad. It just mean they were better suited for some other job, maybe sales, maybe HR, maybe janitorial, I don't know, but you can benchmark any job on here to find the style that's best suited. Here's another application. This was got called up by the HR department because there was a lot of bad morale and motivation in this company. And HR, like many times, gets stuck in the middle. They're, don't want to make the CEO mad, so they bring in consultants. And we found that the plant manager, who is way over here on the right, sort of like Donald Trumpish behavior style, and the president, who is a PhD, analytical, who didn't like conflict, avoided conflict, didn't like to communicate, and there was conflict between the two people, so we sent the plant manager off for coaching. We identified the morale problems of the company. They were saying the managers didn't talk, they didn't reward, show appreciation, all those soft things that are important. So we had all the managers take the report. We found, well, they were sort of like the PhD president, analytical, overstudied things, didn't communicate well. And when we put them through our class and say, look, you got to adapt your behavior style to meet the employees who are over here somewhere, and be more approachable, flexible, friendly, talk more, coach more. And then when they finally know that, then they were able to fix the retention turnover problem. All right, so we're going to finish up just to show you a little bit about what our company does and how you can get some assessments if you want to try them out on yourself or your company. Chart Your Course International, we've been in business for about 20 years, and I have several colleagues and partners who do many of these things that I'm talking to you about. We put on workshops, team workshops to make people understand each other, communicate better, reduce conflict. And those workshops are a half day or a whole day long. We also provide assessments to people to use for communication, team building, hiring. And like I said, we have 9 varieties of DISC assessments and maybe 40 other types of assessments for stress, that emotional intelligence, higher level reports for executives. So all that's on my website. We do certification for those people who want to really get deep in knowing how to read the reports and the nuances and read between the lines, because most of the reports are pretty self-explanatory. And so we have different types of certification programs. And then we also work one-on-one with employers on hiring individuals and share what we've seen with the thousands of people we've used assessments on over the years, everything from interior design to salespeople. All right, when we do a workshop, again, we always like to have a lot of fun in workshops. We don't PowerPoint people to death, very interactive, fun, and educational. And then our certification programs, we have 3 types of certification: a 2-day master class that we do in Atlanta. One of my partners does a training in Atlanta. It's a small group of people, very detailed, very hands-on. And then we have, for those who don't want to travel, we condense the 2 days into 4 parts or 5 parts over the webinar using GoToMeeting, and then we have a self-study DISC program. And all that information's on chartcourse.com or behaviorprofile.com. So you might be thinking now that you've learned about DISC, what am I? And we have basic DISC report you can take. It's $45, and then we have a standard report that's $75. This is 22 pages. This is 22 pages. This is 12 pages. But it's amazingly fascinating on how accurate the report is. So we will email you a link to these reports an hour after we hang up today if you're interested. If you have any other questions on the certification training or workshops, feel free to email me here at chartcourse.com. So that's pretty much the webinar today, and if there's any questions, feel free to answer a question or raise your hands, and otherwise we'll finish up here in another minute or so. Any questions?